So in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to define anxiety through this neuroscience lens. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is based upon the polyvagal theory. So if you're familiar with that, this will be new for you. If you're not, don't worry. You are going to learn a ton about kind of what that means and what that can do to shift your relationship with your anxiety. So based on the polyvagal theory, our nervous system has three primary states. We have our regulated state. This is where we feel safe and connected. We have a sympathetic state, which is where we are really upregulated. This is our activated state. And this is where kind of anxiety and anger, irritation, anticipation, where that lives. And then that third state is our freeze or our shutdown state. We enter that state when our nervous system gets so overwhelmed that it feels like all it can do is shut down for survival. So a healthy nervous system is not a nervous system that sits in regulation all the time. A healthy nervous system is a flexible nervous system that can be upregulated or downregulated and return to regulation with relative ease. It means that we get triggered into activation when life appropriately calls for that, when there is a really stressful experience or maybe we really are in danger, and that occasionally we take on so much we get overwhelmed and shut down. But again, having a regulated nervous system means that we are anchored in that regulated zone and we come back to it with relative ease. Now, understanding anxiety within this same spectrum, if you are somebody who feels anxious most of the time, it means that you are anchored in your sympathetic state. It means that occasionally you might feel regulated, occasionally you might shut down, but that has become your default state. And now this can happen for a number of reasons. The first being chronic stress. If you have lived a life that introduced just one stressor after another, after another, after another, or if in your recent history, maybe the last month, 2 months, year, couple years, has been full of a lot of triggers and stressors, well, then you have essentially told your nervous system, we are kind of always in danger. You always need to be on high alert. And this can be really problematic for us. I want you to think about any piece of machinery. If you run any piece of machinery in overdrive, right, this state of fight or flight, all cylinders are firing inside our body, right? If you run a piece of machinery in overdrive for too long, what happens? It shuts down. And so a lot of times anxiety also comes with or kind of progresses into other chronic illnesses, autoimmune, digestive issues. Something that people don't put together a lot is that things like IBS, diarrhea, constipation, metabolism, or hormone imbalances can have a root cause in nervous system dysregulation because of this chronic stress state. Another thing that can cause us to kind of be in this constant state of hypervigilance, always jumping to worst case scenario, could be unhealed trauma or a history of traumatic experiences. And when we talk about trauma, I want you to think about trauma as anything that bumped you so far outside your window of tolerance that you couldn't self-regulate. So this could be what we call kind of big T trauma. This could be a specific incident, right? An assault, an abuse, a car accident. One big thing where it's like clear, that was definitely outside my ability to handle. I didn't have the tools to regulate. Or it could be an accumulation of a lot of small things, right? That could be bullying at school, coming home to an empty house, maybe dysregulated parents. And if you get pinged outside of your ability to self-regulate enough times, you eventually adjust to being in that state of hypervigilance. And that is often kind of what becomes a chronic state of anxiety. It's this idea that you have to constantly be prepared for the worst case scenario because at one point in your life, something happened that you weren't expecting. And so your brain and your nervous system kind of made this imprint of you always have to prepare for the unexpected, otherwise you could die. Because our nervous system and our brain only have one job, and that's to keep us alive. And they don't actually care whether our life feels good or looks good, whether we achieve our goals. They just care about our survival. And so if there's a particular circumstance and you went into a state of fight or flight and it worked for you to keep you alive, well, if there is ever a situation in your life that looks familiar to that, your brain's going to be like, immediately fight or flight because that's what kept us alive in the past. Let's do it again. So when we can understand anxiety through this neuroscience lens, all we're saying is that instead of looking at anxiety as something that is innately wrong with me, that you came to this world with a couple broken parts, we can look at your life history. We can look at your lifestyle, the habits that you have or don't have, the current stress level that exists for you, your internal, your external environment, taking into consideration the people around you as well. Because our nervous system is constantly scanning both our internal environment and our external environment, as well as the other humans around us. And it's doing this constant threat versus safety analysis. And what happens when we have elevated stress levels or kind of this traumatic imprint, when we default to that state of fight or flight, we now filter every situation through a heightened sensitivity for danger, because we think we have to in order to keep ourselves safe. And so when we can understand anxiety through this lens, our symptoms start to make sense. Every symptom you experience makes sense through this lens of neuroscience. Every symptom you experience is a message from your body to try to get your attention. And when you can understand that healing happens in and through the body, that you are never going to be able to outthink your anxiety, because your nervous system is at the core of this. Trauma and our stress responses are all stored in our body. When it comes to mind-body communication, 80% of that communication happens from your body to your brain. And so this is why a lot of people really struggle with talk therapy. It doesn't make them better, or they get stuck at some point in talk therapy, because we're only dealing with that 20% of the equation. So if that hasn't worked for you, if you are feeling really validated right now, I'm glad. You are going to learn so much more in this course about how you can use this new understanding of anxiety, that it's not that there's something innately broken or wrong with you. You are just stuck in this survival state and filtering the world around you with a heightened sensitivity for danger. And that's what causes you to be really reactive, to jump to worst case scenario. And over time, there are ways to regulate your nervous system and rewire your mind so that you can feel like you have control over your triggers and can just show up in the world in a way that you want to. So hopefully that gave you a new definition for anxiety, or at least a new perspective on it. And I'll see you in the next lesson.